Caffeine and alcohol, two of the most commonly used drugs worldwide, especially by college students. Some students can't go a single day without caffeine or else they will be unable to properly function. And alcohol is something that many students turn to in times of stress or maybe even to celebrate that good grade on a test. But what we don't think about is how much these two affect our motor learning and performance. In this video, we're going to talk about how caffeine and alcohol affect our motor performance. We will first share our findings, and then we will each perform a couple of experimental tasks, focusing on balance, also focusing on reaction time, and even more fine motor movement tasks like writing with your non-dominant hand. But before we get to that, let's talk about how caffeine and alcohol either positively or negatively impact our performance.
Alcohol, as most of us know, is a nervous system depressant, and the cerebellum, which is part of the brain and part of the central nervous system, is a huge factor in motor learning and motor performance. So as we already know, the cerebellum affects trial and error and motor coordination, and alcohol has a huge effect on this, which is why we experience so many untimely falls when inebriated. And this can be seen in the journal article I found, which took participants and had them at blood alcohol levels of 0.6% and 1%. And then they were stimulated to almost fall down either by having their eyes closed or being stimulated in their calves. And what we found in that study, that as blood alcohol levels grew, motor coordination slowly declined, particularly in the lateral direction, which is why we could see so many people taking a hard tumble after a night of boozing. So I'm expecting in our own experiment to see similar results and a lot of failure in motor coordination.
Across many different articles that I read, all the experiments had the same ending results of slowing down each individual's motor skills. One of the studies done in 2015 that looked at certain doses of blood alcohol content, specifically at 0.65, and compared them to certain driving-related tasks. These tasks consisted of responding to speed of information processing, motor coordination, and information processing capacity. The results of this experiment showed how alcohol significantly impaired all aspects of performance.
Caffeine is usually in the form of coffee, tea, and energy drinks, and has been proven to enhance various aspects of physical and cognitive functions. In an article that I read written by Monique Loris, it states that the scientific consensus regarding basic cognitive functions is that caffeine in doses of 32 to 300 milligrams enhance fundamental aspects of cognitive performance such as attention, vigilance, and reaction time. In a more recent study done in 2015, 13 elite female volleyball athletes ingested energy drinks containing 210 milligrams, while some of the other players only ingested a placebo, no caffeine. After consuming the caffeine, they had to do certain volleyball tasks such as a standing spike, a jumping spike, some squat jumps, and a few other things. As a result, in comparison to the placebo drink, the ingestion of the caffeinated energy drink increased the ball's velocity in the standing jump pike and the jumping spikes, and overall everything that they had to do. So overall, after lots of research, it's proven that caffeine can significantly improve physical and cognitive performance. Although caffeine tends to enhance our performance, there are also some negative aspects.
So according to the article that I read by Peter Rogers, it was basically a conducted test between two subjects of them ingesting caffeine. So one subject had 150 milligrams of caffeine, and the second subject had 100 milligrams of caffeine. So for the experiment, they had to stay up overnight. As they ingested caffeine, they were being monitored. And so as that took place, they had to compare between the two on who had the much more or worse results between the two, mainly focusing on those three components that we tested on. And the results were that the high dosage subject happened to have a worse mental alertness, poor performance, and simple reaction time compared to the person who had less caffeine.
For this first task, we chose to write 3 different phrases with our non-dominant hand. The first phrase was, "Motor learning is a result of practice." The second phrase was to write our full names, and the third was to write out numbers 1 through 20. After completing this task, we moved on to task number 2.
Diamond, club, left. Spade, heart, right.
Yes.
Diamond, club, spade.
For task number 2, we chose something a bit more difficult. Using 25 random cards from a deck, for every card shown, you must either raise your right hand when you see a heart or a spade, or raise your left hand if you see a diamond or a club. Zaya kept score by writing which hand was lifted as each card was drawn, and after, we'd go through the deck to match up and find the errors based on the data.
Oh, I messed up. I got my foot right. Oh, I messed up again. Diamond, club, spade, heart.
Club.
Club. There you go.
With much trial and error, we each performed this task a total of 3 times in hopes of bettering our previous scores. It was extremely difficult trying to connect the right arm to the right card. At this point, we're hoping the caffeine will help.
That is so nasty.
There we go.
After consuming about 16 ounces of coffee, which equals to about 200 milligrams of caffeine, Trevor and I repeated this handwriting task, and the goal was to beat our previous times. As you can see, I'm writing a lot quicker than I was before, and so is Trevor. That caffeine hit us super hard.
Dude, I'm so jazzed right now. I don't even want to write. I'll write
What is
lefty
that
all
first
day.
word? Is that,
Don't worry
is that
about
a
it.
word?
Immediately after the handwriting task, with the caffeine still fresh and firing up in our systems, we performed the card task again. As you can see, there's a lot more focus here, but the real question is, will there be less errors? Will the caffeine help us or hurt us? Moving on to part 2 of our experiments, but this time with Zaya and Justin, we decided to have them do the same card test because it focuses on their speed, their thought process, and their reaction time, which are all things that can be affected once they consume alcohol. Upon completing the card test for a total of 3 times each, they then performed a balance test. Balance is controlled by the cerebellum, which again may be affected once alcohol is consumed. For this test, we used Justin's super cool balance board, and using just one foot to balance, the goal was to not let their other foot touch the ground. Each time they touched the ground, that counted as 1 error. They did blocks of 30-second trials.
Diamonds and clubs.
Diamonds and
spades.
clubs. Left hand, right hand.
This is with
spades and
alcohol.
heart. There you go.
After consuming their alcohol, it looks like Zaya is a lot more focused than he was before. He's really trying not to get any errors for this round.
And action.
Hey, ready.
Can end right now. Damn it.
Compared to Zaya, Justin was struggling a little bit. But then their next test was the balance test. Once again, Zaya showed a lot more focus. He's barely touching the ground. Actually, I don't think he touched the ground at all this second round when we did the balance test here. So you can tell the alcohol helped him with his balance here. And then we have Justin, who couldn't really stay on it like he did before the alcohol was consumed. So as you can see, alcohol does affect. Sometimes it helps people, or sometimes it hurts people. Now it's time to see the results.
Cartoon.